What is the U.S. perception of how Russia is handling the situation in eastern Ghouta militarily?
Well, I think it's clear that the Russians have more influence than they let on with respect to the regime, but they clearly don't control everything that they do. On the one hand, they've called for a ceasefire. On the other hand, every time there's a ceasefire, the Syrians go and violate it almost immediately, imposing lots of casualties on civilians, especially children. And I think that the regime's behavior is really inexcusable. I would like to see President Putin exert far more clout with the Syrians in restraining them from doing this. Ghouta is a hotspot because it's close to Damascus. It's been a contested area for a couple of years. The Syrians, from their point of view, of course, want to control this area. That's understandable, but not at the price of inflicting these kinds of avoidable and barbaric civilian casualties on people.
And of course, Russia makes few distinctions between rebel groups in Syria, viewing most of them as terrorists. How does the Russian approach differ from the U.S. approach in Raqqa, where many civilians died in airstrikes as well?
Well, I think you need to start with the basic precept of Russian national security policy, which is called regime protection. When the United States thinks in terms of security interests, we think in terms of interests of the United States vis-a-vis other states. When the Russians think in terms of national security, they think in terms of what can we do, what should be done in order to preserve the regime's own viability. That leads to strategies in which, if you oppose what the Russians want to do, the way that they get around inflicting casualties or allowing casualties to be inflicted is they just call you a terrorist. So a terrorist for a lot of Russians is, by definition, somebody that's opposed to what they want. The United States uses a much more nuanced definition that has to do with people that use violence against civilians to achieve political purposes.
And how can pressure be applied on violating parties? And if so, what would that look like?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think if anybody had a magic answer to it, we would have heard it by now. I think that what's called for is very intensive diplomacy. The fact of the matter is you have a lot of parties that have security interests in the region. The regime does, the Russians do. The United States is supportive of stability and finding ways to achieve a peaceful democratic outcome to all of this. Turkey has an interest, the Kurds have an interest, and there is no one simple solution to this. It's simply a matter of really getting your hands around the problem, defining what the core interests that everybody really has are, and finding some way to strike a balance that creates stability and peace, and above all, ends the tragedy of children being bombed by Syrian aircraft.
All right, James Farwell, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thanks for being with us.